This is the first in a number of short videos that I'm going to be posting that will explain a little bit more about the shipper-driven traffic simulator that I've been working on for a while. This first video I'd like to talk about the setup, the various items of information that you need to enter into the system in order to get the thing up and running. So the first thing we're going to look at, this is the home page, the first thing we're going to look at are the car codes. Before you enter any cars into the system, you need to enter all the possible codes that you might use for your various rolling stock. What I've used here are sort of abbreviated versions of some of the AAR codes, and they have mechanical codes and car codes. And when you're talking about tank cars, it really gets complicated. And the same thing with covered hoppers. But for my modeling purposes, these are the ones I chose. And so we have locomotive, generic flat cars, GONs, open top hoppers, covered hoppers, caboose. Three types of refrigerator cars, because I have insulated box cars, I have mechanical refrigerators, and I have refrigerator cars still need ice. And stock cars, tank cars, and your average box car. So those are the car codes that I have set up. And again, you're free to use whatever you want. One or two letters normally is fine. The next thing we're going to talk about are the various stations on the line. In my case, the model railroad I'm using for this demonstration only has 3 stations. And two of them are off stage, so that makes it easy. So the first one is the M&L staging yard that represents the town of Winthrop, Minnesota. Then there's the staging yard for the CNNW that represents their yard in New Ulm. And then the M&L yard in New Ulm itself. We'll talk about these routing instructions again in a little bit. So those are the 3 stations I have. Now each station can be broken down into locations. And a location is any place where you can position a car. It doesn't have to be a spot for loading or unloading. It could also be just a siding. It could be a storage track. So in this case, I have a bad order location. That for me is off stage on my workbench. We have the M&L staging yard. This 553 asterisk represents all of New Ulm in general. I use the station numbers that the M&L used back before they were purchased by the Chicago Northwestern. I'm pretty sure all North American railroad systems use station numbers these days. And so what I've done for each location is I put the station number followed by a short description of what's there. So for example, in the New Ulm yard, there is a elevator, co-op elevator for grain loading, and also for that same co-op they have another location where they can unload fertilizer. Lumber yard has a place for spotting cars. The power plant has 2 specific places, one for coal unloading and one to load ash from the power plant. The team track can handle 4 cars. I just call it the team track. I'm not really worried about which place they're in because the truck will pull up to it wherever they're at. The Chicago Northwestern has an interchange track, a transfer track. The yard as a whole I put down as a location. That way if I want to drop a car someplace in the yard on any one of the tracks that's not being used, I can just call it that. And finally the CNNW staging yard, which is a location off of their transfer track. So stations are made up of locations. Locations can have track names if they wish. It can have spots. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And then I put remarks there kind of as a hint to the crew as to what the purpose of that is for. Shipments are sort of the driving force behind this whole thing. A shipment is also given a code. I've chosen to give it a code that starts with the station number where the shipment comes from, the station number where the shipment goes, and a little description of what it is. These codes need to be unique. You can use whatever you wish. I just found it convenient to kind of use the station numbers to tell me about where they're coming from and where they're going to. Then a little bit description, for example, fertilizer to farmers co-op, hardware to Simon's Lumber, and so on. Cheese from New Ulm from the C&W side, heading up to Minneapolis on the MNCL. Then a consignment, and this, what is in this column here, this is what shows up on the various documentation on the waybills and on switch lists. Then you have a car code, and this is the car, that type of car that can be used to haul that product. So when you enter a new shipment, you enter this information, and then you get to pick from the type of car codes that you entered previously. That's why you have to put your car codes in first. Then the location where the shipment is loaded, and again, that's based on the locations that you put in earlier. So when you're creating a new shipment, you put in the code, description, consignment, select the car code, select where it's going to be loaded, select where it's going to be unloaded. And these numbers, these fields, you normally can, this first one you can normally just leave 0, that's fine. Minimum and maximum interval, that is the amount or the number of operating sessions that control when the shipment will go out. So in this case, this shipment will happen at least every 6, but no more often than every 7 operating sessions. This one here, this lumber, every 3rd operating session, or 4th or 5th, somewhere in between there. The computer will pick a random number between there to figure out when that shipment occurs. This is the number of carloads involved in the shipment. I don't use tonnage, I don't use gallons, I just use carloads. So a lot of these you see are just 1 carload because my siding's a little short. But down here, like for the elevator, it could be 2 or 3 carloads. And then these comments, again, tell the people who are assigning cars how they would, if there's anything interesting they need to know. For example, this one here for soybeans, use grain service covered hoppers only. In other words, don't use one that's for cement or ashes or stuff like that. So those are the shipments, and these are the ones I have set up for my both online and offline customers. Once you have those in, then you can start adding your cars. And this is all fairly self-explanatory. Reporting marks, again, when you add a new car in, you get to pick the car code, where it's currently located, and its current status. You see here I have some empty ones and some unavailable ones. The unavailable ones are ones that I have, they don't even qualify for bad order. They've not even been put together if they're kits or things like that. Here's one you can see that's loaded, and the columns here, the consignment, loading location, and destination for this one. It's got a consignment of coal, and it's coming from MNCL offstage, and it's going to power plant spot number 1. And again, these comments here tell me a little bit more about it. So this is an LO, a covered hopper car, but there's lots of covered hopper cars. So this one's for grain service. And that's how why I'm just able to use just a rather simple car codes as opposed to rather complex ones. Here's another covered hopper. This one is fertilizer service only. So you have all your cars in there. You have all your shipments. Now we're going to set up the jobs. And each job, you can give a description. So for example, on this little sample railroader here, we have 2 way freights. One comes into New Ulm in the morning and heads out in the afternoon. These 2 down here are the C&W yard switcher, and that actually is one of these 050 switchers where I just pick up the car out of the offstage box and put it onto the transfer track, or vice versa. But let's look at number 60, which is the incoming way freight in the morning. It says it picks up its cars from Winthrop, and the cars it gets are the ones for New Ulm customers, and also for anything heading to the C&W offstage via the transfer track in New Ulm. And its job is to put its train together in Winthrop, which is the staging yard, and then set out all those cars in the yard to be spotted later by 61. Now this is just a turn, so 60 and 61 are actually the same crew. They come down in the morning, they put their train together in Winthrop, they come down in the morning, pull the train into the yard, take a break. Then in the afternoon, they will assemble their outbound train. They'll pull cars from the C&W transfer track, If they have anything to go to the CNW, they'll take them over at the same time. Then they'll pick up any outbound cars from the local customers, and they'll once they pull those, they'll spot any cars they brought in the morning. If there isn't room, they have to leave them in the yard someplace until the next day. Some of these customers aren't exactly speedy in unloading things. And once they've done all that, then they put their outbound train together and head back to Winthrop. So looking at each one of these jobs, the job is actually composed of some steps, individual steps. So here we have, again, these are rather simple because it's just because of the short number of stations we have. Each step has a sequence number. I go by tens. That way, if I want to insert a step 15 in here, I can do that without having to renumber everything. So the first one says when I get to, when I'm starting out in New Ulm at the station 553, I need to pick up any cars that are from my local customers and set them out. I also need to pick up any cars for the M&L staging yard. Once I get to that location, then I set them out. And this is nothing more than a sequence of locations where you go and telling it, do you want to be able to pick up or set out? Some places you don't want to, you want to do one or the other. Some places you might do both. When we run a switch list here, you'll see how this works. So those are the jobs. Car orders are generated by the system based on the information that's in the shipment portion of the database. And we have one car order out there right now. It's for coal, and we're going to generate some more in a bit. This one was generated on operating system 5, and it's for a load of coal that goes from offstage. Is currently in the yard, and it goes to the power plant. This was actually left over from the day before because there's only one unloading location at the power plant, so they had to leave this one in the yard. So that car order is still out there. It hasn't been completed because the product has not been delivered. So that's the information that we use to set up the database: the car codes, stations, locations, shipments, cars, jobs. The last thing, as far as the stations go, we do add routing instructions. These are displayed for the humans that route cars and assign cars to jobs later on when we get into the switch list, and we'll talk more about that there. So in this case, in New Ulm, any car going for 553 asterisk, which means any 553 location, any customer, is spotted by number, is handled by number 61. Any car going to the M&L offstage is handled by 61. Any car going to the CNW offstage is handled by number 92. That's the CNW switch job. And so it pulls the cars from the transfer track and takes them to the offstage. Again, that is an 050 switcher. That's not represented by an actual physical job on the railroad. So that kind of covers the setup. Just a few more comments about this section down here. Once you have your database set up, it's a good thing to make a backup copy of it. And so you click on this thing here, and then you give it a name, and it'll copy all your stuff off to another database using the name it gave you, so that if you have problems, you can always pull that back in. And you do that by clicking on this link, Restore the Database from a Backup Copy. So you can see here I have quite a few backup copies out there that all happen at different stages of running the railroad. And that way, if something happens, goes haywire, I can always go back to one of these. I have a date on them, so that tells me how far I can go back to restore the database and pick up from there. If you have too many backup copies, you're running out of disk space, you can remove them from here. Importing initial car data. If you have a lot of cars to upload into the car portion here, rather than entering them one at a time in this location, if you have them in a spreadsheet already, you can modify that spreadsheet slightly and add it and bring it into this portion of it. You can either add to the car data, in which case it will not erase any of the car information that's already in there, or you can replace it all at once. If you do that, be careful because it wipes out everything. There's no undo. But if you have a lot of cars and you already have that information in a spreadsheet, this makes it easier to upload it into the system. Restart system, what that does, it doesn't get rid of any information. What it does is starts everything over at day 0 again. So if you're going along, you aren't happy with how your shipments are going or some of the routings, you just want to start over and refigure it, you can click on this one, and it'll set all your shipping back to the starting point, cancel all existing waybills, all cars become empty and available. The next one, wipe, that's dangerous. What that'll do is that'll erase everything out of the database. If you just want to actually just scrap everything and start over from scratch, that would be the one to do that. In both cases, in this case here, it asks you once. If you make sure you want to restart because there's no undo. When you go to this one here, it'll ask you this one and then ask you again just to double check. And finally, the settings. Those are some things that we can kind of use for testing and some of the other internals. It has to do with, for example, like the width of your paper in your printer, the initials and name of the railroad you want to show up on the documents, and so on like that. So that's just a quick rundown of the information you provide to the database before you get going. The next short video we'll talk about these two menus over here where we actually get into our daily cycle. The daily cycle consists of generating car orders, filling the car orders, repositioning any empty cars if we need to, and then building and closing switch lists as the jobs run. And finally, the last thing we do is load and unload any cars that have been spotted for the day. And then the next operating session, we start in and all over again and do the same thing. The reports will help you during this process to kind of keep track of things. It'll print switch lists if you want to use those for your crews. It'll print out waybills if you want to use those. It'll tell you what cars are at what stations. It tells you for the people who want to manage your fleet of boxcars, this will tell you where all your boxcars are at, or your flat cars or whatever. These two will give you some estimates about upcoming shipments and when shipments will happen, and when they do, how many car loads it will be. And these two down here print out either QR codes or barcodes that you can use to attach to your cars or locations on the layout to kind of ease some data entry problems. So we'll talk about these things in the next upcoming videos.